Lester, a young orphan, is reading comic books while traveling by bus in a world where superheroes exist. Lester starts to reimagine the story, positioning himself as the supervillain known as the Orphan because he is sick of seeing villains vanquished. The boys start making fun of Lester, calling him a comic book nerd, and claiming that this will prevent him from ever being adopted. Despite his embarrassment, the young man chooses to become a henchman because he wants to be the next supervillain. Years later, when Lester turns 16, he goes to register at the base of a well-known villain. The program accepts volunteers to serve as henchmen for evil geniuses. When he gets there, he discovers a radioactive cheese factory that the Burper uses as a weapon. In addition to his soldiers, the site is home to workers in a variety of factory positions. Hank, a factory worker, notices Lester playing with a laser gun as he makes his way to work for another day and inquires as to why. The boy then shows him his application for the volunteer program and a flyer about the henchman. Hank tells him to give up on his dream of becoming a supervillain because only 17 volunteers have so far succeeded in doing so. The boy is adamant that he will be the next evil genius when all of a sudden the Force 5 superhero group destroys the factory roof. When the Burper sees the heroes, he gives the goons the order to use their radioactive cheese as weapons to attack the group. On the other hand, Force 5 has talented superheroes such as the twins who use their pom-poms to launch energy blasts. In addition to them, the superhero Happy Beat has the ability to control his elastic body spin like a top and attack every henchman in his path. Next up is Nick of Time, a hero who moves quickly and attacks the henchmen before they have a chance to defend themselves. As the fighting gets more intense and the factory is completely destroyed, Hank and his friends must leave as soon as possible. He witnesses Lester attempting to shoot Jack with a cheese gun during the escape, but the superhero is quicker and avoids the blows. At last, he corners the boy on the edge of the damaged bridge and is ready to grab him, but Hank uses his wrench to knock Crazy Man down. He then advises the boy to stop being a henchman and not to follow his example. But Lester is not going to give up on his dream, and now that the Burpers factory has been destroyed, he chooses to search Evil Union's secret island for another villain. When he gets there, he meets up with Hank, who is being chastised by the head of security for saving the boy at the factory. He is made to take Lester on as an apprentice as a form of punishment, and the two go to Supervillain City to look for a new job. In order to achieve this, Hank brings the boy to the job fair where he meets up with his former co-workers from the factory. Additionally, the group's situation is not going well. The factory attack claimed the life of one of them, Doug the janitor. Now that the old man's head is affixed to a glider, the six must select a new antagonist or risk losing their jobs. Regretfully, Hank and Lester are now working at the Villain Museum since the majority of them have already recruited new goons. Lester is aware of the tale of the Time Bandit, his encounter with the superheroes, and subsequent fall into a lava river. The two are hired to clean inside, and the boy becomes thrilled upon seeing the villain and artifacts, particularly the Time Bandits who are imprisoned in a diamond tomb. While attempting to retrieve a powerful orb, he became trapped in the diamond when the magma crystallized. Legend has it that anyone who opens this orb will be able to fill any of their dreams. But Hank does not care about the villain's tales and gives the mop to the boy because they have a lot of work to do. While cleaning, Hank runs into Jolene, the museum curator. The two instantly recognize each other because they collaborated on the supervillain Baron Blackout years ago, and they express their feelings for one another. After that, Hank tries to ask her out, but Lester ruins the whole thing by knocking over one of Jolene's restored museum pieces. The boy quickly fixes everything, but Jolene has to go back to her lab after receiving an urgent phone call. Fortunately, she ended up leaving her tablet at the museum. Hank uses this as an opportunity to speak with Jolene while Lester keeps cleaning. Once more, the boy becomes sidetracked by the museum's objects and falls on his own mop and collides with a massive box. Lester gets excited and puts on the strange helmet that emerges from inside after reading the inscriptions on the box that describe a prototype suit of armor. However, this triggers the armor system, which starts to assemble itself on his body. It has flamethrowers, rockets, and lightning bolts. However, Lester loses control of them and starts demolishing the museum as a whole. When Hank hears the noise, he rushes to investigate and instructs Lester to remove the armor, but he is unable to do so and crashes through the museum ceiling. The robot security guards are distracted by watching the news, where a reporter interviews Captain Superior in Apex City after he saves the world once more, so Hank leaves the premises undetected to avoid losing his job. The superhero admits that he is tired of dealing with such feeble foes, but there are already rumors of a new adversary. Witnesses have reported seeing an armored figure roaming the city, breaking into buildings, attacking people, and demolishing public areas, though their identity is unknown. Lester is the antagonist in this case since he is unable to control the armor even after wearing it for hours. After returning home, Hank tries to put it out of his mind when Lester breaks into his apartment and completely destroys it. Lester tries to explain that he only put on the armor as a joke, but now it is out of control and he needs help to take it off. Once again, the suit is about to activate its weapons on its own, but Hank has an idea and tells the boy to open the visor. The man is already tired of the boy and gives up on being his mentor, telling him to leave his house. Lester complies, and at last the armor stops moving. However, Hank punches the boy until he is unconscious in order to prevent any dangers. Soon after, a masked figure emerges in front of them all and reveals himself to be Baron Blackout. Far away in Earth's atmosphere, a spaceship flies over the planet with a crew of henchmen waiting for their leader. Despite his 10-year absence, he has returned with new plans to rule the world. He must first test the loyalty of his men, so he starts questioning each henchman. If they do not respond, his powerful weapon will turn them into zombies. Sadly, the majority of the villain's henchmen failed the test, leaving him with an army of worthless, slimy undead. He now needs more henchmen, so he enlists his second-in-command Biff to help him go to the Union of Evil and find new volunteers. Hank visits Jolene's home in the meantime, where she is completing the restoration of a few more uncommon supervillain artifacts. After learning about the incident at the museum, she does not want to talk to him, but Hank asks for her assistance and shows her Lester, who is still unconscious and wearing the armor. He clarifies that the boy is unable to control the suit and that it must be taken off before further issues develop. After taking them to her lab, Jolene reveals that the armor belonged to Ultimatum, a villain who also did not know how to use it and ended up crashing into a mountain while wearing it. Jolene secures Lester to a table with Hank's assistance, but as soon as the boy wakes up, the armor activates thrusters in his feet. As the scientist tries to calm the boy down, the table flies across the room and collides with a wall. The thrusters deactivate once Lester settles down, suggesting that the armor establishes an emotional connection with the wearer. As soon as Jolene goes to the kitchen to get tea, Hank tells Lester that he has decided to train him to be a supervillain. Jolene suggests finding a way to remove the armor as soon as possible, but Hank sees an opportunity to use it to his advantage. The boy becomes enthusiastic about the concept, and the two flee Jolene's lab and make their way to a junkyard. Hank uses auto parts and other vintage equipment to set up a training base when he gets there. When Lester inquires about Hank's transformation into a henchman prior to the start of training, he admits that, like the boy, he once aspired to be a supervillain. He even served as Baron Blackout's henchman alongside Jolene, but one day the villain pointed his gun at a bus carrying young people. Hank and Jolene protested, but the Baron ordered them to leave the control room before firing the weapon. At that point, Force 5 and Captain Superior showed up, and Baron Blackout issued a challenge to engage them in combat. He attempted to attack them with his weapon, but it malfunctioned. The Baron turned to see Hank using an axe to damage the mechanism. In the end, despite his desire to be a supervillain, Hank betrayed his boss in order to do the right thing. Lester quickly recalls that this story was in an issue of Force 5 Comics, which talked about a kind-hearted henchman. Following that incident, Baron Knockout ran away for 10 years. His goons turned themselves in, and Hank was punished by having to work menial jobs to make ends meet. But now that he sees an opportunity to make amends by transforming Lester into a supervillain, the two start training in the junkyard. The boy attempts to develop an emotional connection with the armor by using parts from an old car. After hours of intense training, Lester is able to use the armor's capabilities, avoiding obstacles and hitting targets with ease. He does this by practicing target shooting using the laser shooters, flying with the jet thrusters, and controlling his fear so that the armor stays stable. Now that the boy is prepared, Hank chooses to carry out his plan and meets his friends at a local diner. He explains without going into too much detail that he and his apprentice Lester were both involved in the museum incident, but they must return, so Hank enlists Jane's and the others' assistance to sneak into the museum. His friends decide to assist despite the dangers, and the four of them disguise themselves as robots in order to divert the robotic security officers. The strategy succeeds, and Hank and Lester enter the museum covertly before arriving at the Time Bandit's room, where he remains imprisoned in the diamond. Hank then explains that in order for them to get the wish-granting orb, the boy must use the armor's power. Although Lester does not think this is a good idea, he eventually agrees and launches an energy blast at the diamond, but nothing happens. Lester thinks there is no way to get the orb, and Hank is so disappointed that he begins making fun of the boy. He informs him that Lester will always be a joke in the Union of Evil, and will never be a supervillain since he gives up at first hint of trouble. Lester is so enraged by these remarks that he releases the orb and destroys the diamond with a massive burst of energy. Hank apologizes to the boy as soon as he picks it up and explains that he only said those things to allow him to fully express his power. But when the museum security guards hear the disturbance, they start to encircle the area and give the two instructions to return the orb. The two then use the armor to escape the museum at full speed after Hank refuses to give it to them. They struggle back to the junkyard where Jane and the others are waiting for them. When the group asks what happened, Hank shows them the orb that can make any dream come true because he does not have time to explain. Hank wants to start his life the right way, so he plans to go back in time and never become a henchman. His friends will also have the opportunity to fulfill their wish, but they decline the offer because they do not want to lose anything, including their friendship. Soon after, Jolene shows up and tells Hank not to use the orb because she saw the two running out of the museum. Although no one is aware of the potential dangers, he has already made up his mind and tosses the orb to the ground. However, Lester catches it in midair and uses his armor to absorb it. The boy claims that altering the past would put everyone's lives in danger, and he will not take that chance for a self-serving ambition. After realizing that Hank was only acting in his own best interests, Jane and the others depart hurt by their friend. Jolene and Lester follow suit. Hank tries to defend himself, but the two depart in the car with the scientist, who is determined to take off the boy's armor. Feeling guilty, Hank goes back to the apartment, takes the money he saved, and packs his bags to leave town as soon as possible. But the head of security on the island captures him and gives the order for his robots to arrest him for the crimes he committed at the museum. In the meantime, Jolene brings Lester to her lab and uses her high-frequency machine to try to remove the armor. But the scientist's machine only fires electrical discharges at Lester because she is so distressed by Hank that she is unable to focus. The boy then advises her to give Hank another chance, since in spite of his errors he has repeatedly saved his own life. The two then keep attempting to remove the armor, but Jolene's machine is unable to do so even after utilizing every frequency. Lester then chooses to take action on his own and makes use of the lab's equipment and tools, but all of his efforts are in vain. Lester is then reminded by Jolene that since the armor is driven by emotions, it ought to disappear on its own if he achieves total tranquility. The boy is then instructed by the scientist to recall a happy memory or location, but in reality he has not felt that way since he was a young child. Nevertheless, she challenges Lester to put in more effort, and the boy recalls how content he was when working out with Hank at the junkyard. Lester is filled with happiness and serenity by this memory, and when he opens his eyes, the armor totally separates from his body. The boy is at last set free, but when Baron Blackout's ship invades Supervillain City, more issues emerge. With Biff's assistance, he kidnaps Jane, Stu, and Yuka, and makes them serve as his goons. If they don't, his machine will turn them into zombies. The three agree because they have no other option, but the villain needs more assistance, so he alerts everyone in the city. The Baron tells them that the city of supervillains will be his first target in his plan for dominance. He begins shooting at different parts of the city, including Jolene's lab, to demonstrate his seriousness. After threatening to turn anyone who refuses to serve him into slimy zombies, the Baron departs the island in an attempt to exact revenge on Force 5. The boss is transporting Hank to prison at that precise moment when he witnesses Baron Blackout attacking the island. He chooses to flee because he is worried about his friends, and he attacks the boss, causing the car to crash in the middle of the road. Following that, the boss tries to stop Hank, but he punches him and flees to the diner in search of Jane and her friends. When he gets there, the only person he finds is Doug, who has managed to hide, and requests his assistance in confronting the Baron. Meanwhile, the villain has just arrived in Apex City, where he discovers Force 5's base. When the group sees Baron, they are not intimidated and even make fun of him for having lost and fled 10 years prior. But Baron Blackout uses his weapon in response to the provocation, turning the 5 superheroes into slimy zombies. After eliminating the group, the villain attacks the city's citizens, and before long he will control the entire world. After seeking refuge in a basement room from the attack, Jolene and Lester emerge from the lab far away. Doug then shows up and delivers a message from Hank stating that he went alone to confront Baron Blackout. Lester and Jolene decide to assist him, but they must act quickly because Hank is flying a van toward the Baron's ship. When the supervillain sees him approaching through the cameras, Hank grabs a rocket launcher and fires at the ship, but the shots are ineffective. The Baron and his group decide to retaliate by firing guided missiles at the traitor after laughing at the circumstances. After that, Hank drives the van quickly through the city and avoids 2 of the missiles, causing them them to crash into the city's bridge. But there are still 2 left, so Hank rushes back to the ship and smashes the windshield as the missiles get closer. The rockets launch at full speed as soon as they lock onto the target, but Hank ducks, and the missiles pierce the windshield, striking the Baron's ship squarely. Hank storms the ship after piercing the hole and demands that the Baron bring his friends back. The villain responds by getting his weapon ready and firing at Hank. However, just as it appeared to be the end, another beam hits the Baron's weapon, exposing Lester in his armor. Doug and Jolene board the ship right away, and Lester gives Hank instructions to locate his friends and flee as soon as possible. After that, the 3 go through the hallways to find Jane, Stu, and Yakov. However, Biff and the other goons attempt to stop them. The 3 flee by hiding in a room where they witness the launch of the emergency pods. Doug is going to inquire as to how Jane, Stu, and Yakov were able to get away. However, the 4 are taken outside the ship after the pod is activated. Now that they are by themselves, Hank and Jolene make the decision to go to the engine room and turn off the Baron's ship. At the same time, Lester keeps fighting Baron Blackout's weapon with all the strength of his armor. The Baron recognizes the boy's immense power and offers him a spot in his army, promising to train him to be a supervillain. According to Baron Blackout and Lester, their dream has always been to rule the world together, free from interference from friends, family, or heroes. When presented with this proposal, the boy accepts it and then manages to get rid of the armor by calming down once more. Lester and Jolene locate the main reactor elsewhere on the ship and attempt to deactivate it when Biff shows up and gives them the order to surrender. Jolene gets an idea and instructs Hank to pretend to surrender by grabbing his wrench. Following the plan, he raises his hands and tosses the tool into a reactor opening, creating a short circuit that causes the device to explode and the ship to start to fall. No one was hurt despite the impact, so the Baron used the chance to put on the armor's helmet. Then he pointed a gun at Lester and demanded to know how to activate the armor's powers. The boy then instructs the Baron to activate the visor, and as soon as he does, the entire suit of armor starts to put together on his body. Hank and Jolene arrive at the scene shortly after, and the Baron traps them in midair by firing a beam at them. As the Baron's new apprentice, Lester laughs contentedly and claims he can at last realize his lofty goal. When the boy tells everyone about the villain's great deeds, the villain becomes more and more convinced, which energizes the armor. But Lester changes his song, revealing that all of the Baron's evil deeds were actually his fault. These words infuriated the villain, and this emotional struggle overwhelms the armor, causing the Baron's body to contort. The armor eventually explodes, ending Baron Blackout's threat after becoming more and more unstable. As Jane and the others leave the ship to see how their friends are doing, a smaller ship appears from inside, safely delivering Lester, Hank, and Jolene. As a proud father, Hank gives the boy a hug of gratitude after realizing that it was all his idea from the start. However, Biff, who is still alive and plans to exact revenge for the death of his boss, interrupts the moment. Unfortunately for him, Jane punches the insane man multiple times in front of everyone after declaring that she will handle the situation herself. A few days later, Lester and Hank go back to work, this time with their closest friends. After everything he had gone through, the boy came to the realization that becoming a supervillain or even a hero was not his true dream. He had always wanted a true family, and now he would never feel alone again with the henchmen. Subscribe to watch more movies like this. Leave a comment about your favorite movie, and we will make it next. Thanks for watching.